Even from the far horizon one could see the wreckage, the black silhouettes of shattered masts rising from the surf like the ribs of colossuses long dead. The tides were littered with driftwood and bones, both carried endlessly along the current that circled the fortress like a living curse. For 117 days, neither side had yielded an inch. Starwake itself was unlike any other bastion in Meridia's maritime dominion. It did not merely guard the coast, it commanded it. The fortress was hewn directly from the volcanic cliffs of the southern headlands, a fusion of stone and sorcery that had stood for centuries, its ramparts plunged from summit to surf, layered in steep terraces that bristled with bastions, embrasures, and heavy cannon. To the east, its twin towers and the Viper's Gate flanked a narrow sea gate, the only navigable entrance to the inner harbour. Each tower was a mountain of black stone, ringed with rune-carved guns that could strike a moving ship from half a league away. The walls were streaked with yellow lichen and salt, scarred by 100 storms, yet they never crumbled. To the meridians below, the fortress seemed almost alive, a wounded beast that refused to die, roaring fire and iron at any who dared approach. For months, the Meridian fleet and its pirate allies had battered the stronghold from the sea. They came in waves of cannonade, lines of ships, their decks quaking under the recoil of their own broadsides, firing for hours into the cliffs. Each bombardment sent up plumes of smoke and shards of shattered rock. But when the haze cleared, Starwake still stood, defiant, its ramparts already crawling with reavers repairing the damage. "Every gun we break, they build 2 more, one gunner muttered on the deck of the wraithcaller Caspian Vael's flagship. "They've got devils in the stone, mark me." He wasn't entirely wrong. The reavers had held Starwake for decades, yet they'd never understood what they possessed. To them it was just stone and walls, high, defensible, and close enough to the sea for fast retreats. They fortified it crudely, left the halls soot-darkened and the barracks rotted, but the fortress had been built to endure, and endure it had. What puzzled Caspian's forward scouts wasn't the ruin, but the runes. Carved deep into the basalt walls by druidic hands long ago, the old glyphs still pulsed faintly, shedding a spectral glow in the cracks. They had no right to shine. The salt-bound engine, the heart of the fortress, half mechanism, half living magic, was thought long dead. Its druidic source, a gift from the followers of Nithara in an age of uneasy cooperation, had supposedly gone cold when the reavers seized the coast. And yet, the engine still hummed. Deep beneath the keep, its gears groaned and pistons churned, faint but functional. The walls hadn't collapsed because someone had sparked the old magic back to life. Not fully, not cleanly. Just enough to make the runes stir again. It wasn't the reavers. They wouldn't have known where to begin. But someone had bled power into the bones of the fortress, and that someone wasn't druid. Every strategy the Meridian admirals attempted had failed. Direct bombardments were suicidal, assaults by landing craft were slaughtered before they reached the rocks. Night raids foundered in the reefs that girdled the shore like teeth. So the war became a waiting game, a siege of attrition. Caspian Vael had been there from the first day, and by the 4th month he had grown to loathe the waiting more than the killing. From the quarterdeck of the wraithcaller, he watched the enemy fortress under the pale wash of dawnlight. The air smelled of tar, sweat, and decay. Smoke hung in sluggish veils over the water. In the distance, the silhouette of Starwake Quay glowed faintly orange. The reavers had lit signal pyres on the towers, daring them to come. "They want us to charge again," said Elan Marwood beside him, his silver mask reflecting the firelight from the shore. His tone was quiet, thoughtful. "Another glorious slaughter." Caspian smirked without humour. "They've learned how the Armada fights. We line up, they break us apart. We retreat, they jeer, so we starve them instead." He turned from the rail to the gathered lieutenants, spread maps over the damp planks of a cargo crate. Every week they send ships out of the harbour, small, fast cutters, smugglers. If we choke that route, they'll burn through their stores before the next moonrise. The blockade had already begun. No merchant dared sail within 10 leagues of Starwake's coast. Meridian and guild ships formed a wide crescent beyond the cannon range, their anchors dragging against the seabed like iron teeth. They hunted every vessel that tried to slip the line, reaver traders, scavengers, even fishing boats. At night the horizon flickered with fires from intercepted ships, but even with the blockade the fortress endured. Through spyglasses, Caspian's men saw fresh banners unfurled each week. Smoke from forge fires rose steadily within the walls, a sign that the enemy still had iron, powder and food enough to last. The reavers were resupplying somehow. That realization gnawed at Caspian like rust. Each night he paced the deck long after the watchbells fell silent, tracing the outline of the cliffs in his mind. He knew there was a flaw. There had to be. No fortress was perfect, not even this sea-welded citadel. It was Marwood who brought him the clue. "The coastal mages have been studying the currents," the masked captain reported one evening, pointing to a chart splotched with ink and candle wax. "There's an undertow beneath the cliffs, too strong to be natural. It feeds into a network of fissures, likely drainage tunnels from the old construction days." Caspian leaned over the map, following the marks with his calloused finger. "Too small for ships," he murmured, "but not for men." Marwood met his gaze. "You're thinking infiltration." "I'm thinking death by drowning," Caspian replied dryly, then smiled, the thin, dangerous smile that meant he'd already decided. "But if it gets us inside, it's worth the risk." That night the orders went out in secret. A handful of trusted crews, sailors, marines, and guild saboteurs were selected. They would go ashore under fog cover, slipping past the reefs and into the caverns that wound beneath the cliffs. From there, they would climb unseen into the fortress's belly and cripple the guns of the Viper's Gate. If they failed, the siege would drag on until famine or madness claimed them all. If they succeeded, Starwake Quay would finally bleed. The night chosen for the attempt was a thing of slate and silver. The moon hung low and heavy, its reflection broken in the restless chop of the sea. A fog, summoned by Eldorian windcallers aboard the Sable Warden, drifted in thick banks across the blockade line, muffling every sound but the slow heartbeat of the tide. Beneath that veil moved a handful of small craft. Narrow cutters, stripped of paint and sail, rowed by men who barely breathed. At their head, the Wraithcaller's launch cut through the dark like a ghost, its oars wrapped in cloth, its lanterns snuffed. Caspian stood at the prow, hair slick with salt spray, the pale scar at his temple, catching what little light the stars offered. Beside him crouched Captain Elan Marwood, masked and silent, a coil of rope resting across his knees. "Once you're inside," Marwood murmured, "you'll have 1 hour before the tide swallows the lower tunnels again. After that, there's no way out, except through the front." Caspian nodded, eyes fixed on the looming cliffs. "Hold position until you see the signal, then take the gate, hard." Marwood gave no reply, but the grip on his rope tightened. Caspian could already taste the stone dust on the wind, the fortress above them breathing like some sleeping beast. The cliffs of Starwake loomed like a wall of iron-black glass, jagged and sheer. Along their base yawned the sea caves, gaping throats where the surf surged in and out with every heartbeat of the ocean. No sane sailor approached them. The currents there twisted downward into undertows that could snap a ship in two. But Caspian spies had measured the rhythm of the tide for weeks, timing the brief breath-long lull between waves when the sea turned neither in nor out. That was their window. At his signal the oars ceased. The cutters drifted into the shadow of the cliffs. The roar of the surf swallowed all other sound. One by one the raiders slid into the water, clutching their gear. The sea was knife cold. It dragged at their limbs, filled their mouths with salt. Caspian went first. The tunnel's mouth was narrow, forcing them to swim single file through a fissure half filled with seawater. They surfaced into pitch-black silence, the kind that swallowed breath and thought alike. No torch was lit. Only the sound of water dripping and the slow churn of the tide filled the space. Elan Marwood was the first to his feet, water streaming from the fuse coils slung across his chest. He moved without hesitation, boots sure on the slick stone, lean and salt-worn, with fingers blackened from powder and years of careful detonation. Elan had served with Caspian longer than any, still breathing not for coin, nor out of fear, but because he believed. In the guild, in the code, in the dream of the free sea. Caspian trusted him with the blast that would change everything. The passage stank of rust, algae and old oil. Its walls were rough-hewn, streaked with veins of metal that shimmered faintly, remnants of when this had been an overflow duct for molten stone during the fortress's first forging. "Old builders," Marwood whispered. "They bled the mountain to cool the guns." Now it bled seawater instead. They climbed a narrow incline, boots scraping slick stone, until the tunnel opened into a cistern chamber, vast, echoing, ribbed with arches lost in shadow. Overhead, faint orange light filtered through iron grates, the glow of forges above. Caspian raised a fist. The men froze. Footsteps echoed somewhere beyond, heavy and dragging, followed by the clank of chains. 2 Reaver sentries, their armor crudely hammered from ship hulls, patrolled the catwalk that circled the chamber. Caspian motioned to the 2 nearest marines. The men moved like smoke. A pair of soft twangs, crossbow strings. The sentries dropped without a cry, their bodies vanishing into the dark below. They advanced. Every passageway was a vein of the fortress's anatomy, tight, hot, pulsing with the hum of distant engines. They passed storage vaults stacked with barrels of pitch, powder and dried meat. In one alcove they found a shrine carved into the wall, a crude effigy of some sea demon, its mouth stuffed with coins and teeth. Caspian paused only long enough to spit in its face. They climbed a final stair, spiraling upward behind the east tower. The sound of the great guns was deafening now. The Viper's Gate firing in alternating rhythm, their recoil shaking the stone. Through a vented grate, Caspian glimpsed the interior battery, 6 massive cannons mounted on rusted rails, their barrels glowing red from continuous fire. The crews worked like machines, stripped to the waist, skin glistening with oil and soot. There was no path to reach them unseen, so Caspian made one. He turned to Elan Marwood, who was already setting to work without a word. From a reinforced satchel, Elan drew out charges packed with dry blood powder, unstable, red-grained, and twice as potent as any black powder. They worked quickly, placing the charges along the ammunition lifts, powder chutes, and cooling lines. Every motion was precise. Elan moved like a man writing his will in fire. When the last charge was set, Caspian held until the guns above roared again, timing the blast with the thunder of artillery, and gave a single nod. Elan struck the primer. The fortress roared. Flame erupted through the vent tunnels in serpents of blue-white fire. The decks above heaved, stone cracked, men screamed. One of the cannons tore free of its mount and collapsed through the floor in a shriek of iron. Within moments, the eastern tower was a pillar of smoke. Outside, the fleet saw the explosion and answered with thunder. From the darkness beyond the reefs, the Sable Warden surged forward, splitting the fog like a blade. At her helm, Captain Elan Marwood grinned, teeth bared in the firelight. "That's the sign!" he called out loud and sharp. "It's now or never! Runner at the gate!" The crew roared back, rallying to their posts as the ship heaved toward the fortress mouth. Marwood raised his spyglass and trained it on the eastern tower, scanning the shattered windows, the rising smoke, the flicker of movement in the haze. "Come on, Caspian," he muttered, breath fogging the glass. "Show me you're still breathing." Then the warden loosed her broadside, 60 guns at once, a rolling wall of light that turned the night into a false dawn. Behind her, the Meridian ships surged forward under the cover of smoke, their sails painted by fire. But inside the fortress, victory was not yet certain. The Reavers rallied fast, faster than Caspian expected. Alarms blared, a dozen bells ringing in chaotic counterpoint. From the far corridors came the pounding of boots and the guttural bark of commands in the Reavers' harsh tongue. "Back to the cistern," someone shouted. Caspian shook his head. "No retreat. We hold the upper stair until the fleet breaches the gate. If they can't see our signal, they'll think we're dead already." He seized a fallen banner pole and jammed it into the shattered window slit, tying to it a strip of crimson cloth torn from his coat, a signal Marwood would recognize. Then he turned back to the stair. The first Reavers appeared there, eyes gleaming in the smoke, weapons flashing. Caspian drew his cutlass. "Hold the line." And in the thunderlit heart of Starwake Quay, the real battle began. Smoke bled from the tower like ink into water, curling in sickly spirals as the first Reaver counterstrike came crashing through the stairwells. They arrived not as soldiers, but as a tide, bare-chested brutes wielding cleavers, fire spears, and rusted scimitars. Their eyes gleamed with the kind of hunger no rations could fill. Behind them, the halls of the fortress howled, with battle cries and war drums made from the skins of old foes. Caspian met them blade first. At the top of the east stair, his raiding party formed a circle, half-ringed by crumbled walls and burning debris. Gutter burners thundered in the smoke, those crude, hand-forged Reaver guns that spat more fire than accuracy. Each blast lit the stairwell in jagged flashes, the air thick with powder, grit, and blood. Every step back was a compromise, every breath fought for with the edge of a blade. The cistern route had collapsed in the initial blast, blocked by fire and rubble. The only way left was up. And so they retreated to the old sentinel post, a tower once used to signal ships beyond the reef, now a rotting husk of stone and iron. Its upper balcony faced the sea, its lower chambers now flooded with blood and flame. "This isn't a hold fast," Kirin growled, pressing a bloodied cloth to his side. "It's a pyre." "Then we burn standing," Caspian snapped, ripping a Reaver's axe from a fallen ally's chest and hurling it down the stairwell. Rain began to fall. It came in a slow, pattering drizzle, a strange, mocking calm from the gods above. Steam hissed from broken stone, washing the scene in ghostly mist. The fire from the cannon room guttered in the wind, but its smoke still clouded the halls. Caspian could no longer see the sea, only blackness and the distant sound of cannon fire echoing through the storm. He didn't know if the fleet had made it through, didn't know if Marwood had seen the signal, or if this final stand would be remembered only by the dead. He staggered slightly, blood loss tugging at his knees. A Reaver captain had split his pauldron an hour before, a diagonal gash across the shoulder that now pulsed with heat and trembled each time he lifted his sword. Still, he held. Around him the survivors huddled near the balcony wall. They were down to 10. Half were bloodied, all were silent. They had scavenged what they could. 4 held gutter burners pried from Reaver corpses, their barrels scorched and smoking. 3 gripped blood-slick blades. The rest had only broken gear and the will to stand. 2 were too wounded to fight and wouldn't last the hour. There was no way out. The stairwells burned, the cistern route lay buried, and the smoke was closing in. The survivors clutched their scavenged weapons in blood-slick hands, eyes sunken, breaths ragged. Even the Reavers had pulled back, regrouping for the final push, or waiting for the smoke to finish the job. Caspian leaned against the broken stone of the parapet, sword hanging limp at his side, lungs hitching on every breath. Smoke filled his mouth like sand blood, hot and metallic, ran from the corner of his lips. No cannon fire, no signal from the fleet, no sound at all but the hiss of steam and the slow trickle of rain. This was it. This was how it ended. A silence settled over the tower, a silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped turning. Caspian closed his eyes just for a breath and let the weight fall across his shoulders. Then the fortress roared. Caspian opened his eyes. Blood still ran down his chin. His sword still trembled in his hand. But for the first time in hours, he smiled. The stone shook beneath their feet, deep, guttural, alive. Chains screamed, iron groaned. Then the Viper's Gate gave way, not in a slow surrender, but in a catastrophic collapse. The Sable Warden burst through the breach, her prow scorched and splintered from the ram, sails unfurling in the storm like the wings of some iron-clad revenant. She rode a wave of smoke and fury, her hull scarred and gleaming with salt and firelight. Behind her came the Guild fleet, sleek-sailed, black-rigged, each ship a blade drawn from the fog. Their cannon fire still echoed in the cliffs, rolling across the harbour like thunder refusing to die. The silver enamel of the Pact shimmered on their hulls, catching stray light like polished bone. Water surged through the shattered gate, swallowing the lower batteries and crashing through the mangled barricade in a tide of foam and wreckage. Banners unfurled from the guild masts, dark against the firelit sky. Marwood stood at its prow like a figure from some old Eldorian painting, mask radiant in the flamelight, his cloak cut by wind and his hand raised high in command. Behind him, 24 war galleys fanned out in a crescent formation, their decks bristling with marines. And Marwood did not wait. His ships did not anchor. They rammed. The Warden split the last Reaver blockade ship in half, keels grinding, grapples thrown, ropes flew, siege ladders rose, and soon the walls of Starwake were crawling with black-clad reinforcements, guild marines and pirate lancers pouring into the inner bastion like avenging spirits. They climbed over burning gates and scaled rubble-piled towers, and when they reached the sentinel post, they found the defenders still standing, bloody, smoke-blackened and barely breathing, but alive. Caspian stood among them, his cutlass broken halfway down the blade, his free hand clenched around the arm of a wounded ally. "You're late," he muttered as Marwood approached through the haze, blood spattered on the folds of his cloak. The masked captain stopped before him and extended a gloved hand. "You held longer than I would have wagered." Caspian took the hand. "I never bet against myself." Behind them, the marines swept the halls. The last Reaver defenders fell, their screams swallowed by the thunder of the storm. And at last, Starwake Quay fell silent, the kind of silence that follows slaughter where even the air seems reluctant to breathe again. It was over. The fortress, long considered unassailable, had been taken, not by grand fleets, not by superior numbers, but by a small flame carried into the dark and kept alive long enough to burn everything down. The fires had not yet gone out. Here and there along the fortress walls and inner courtyards, thin columns of smoke still rose where powder kegs had ignited or Reaver stores had been put to the torch. But for the first time in nearly 4 moons, the sounds echoing from the ramparts were not those of war, but of laughter, music, and the clatter of a makeshift banquet carved from salvaged tables and broken stone. They called it the Wake of Starwake. Beneath the high shadow of the western bastion, where once the Reaver captains had hoisted their flayed banners, now flew the entwined pennants of the Pirate Guild and the Meridian Armada. Rough canvas awnings had been strung between scorched watchtowers, and barrels of hard cider and salted lamb had been rolled out from both guild holds and the surviving supply flotilla. Caspian Vael sat atop an overturned cannon carriage, boots caked in dried blood, tunic unbuttoned, a long scar curling like ink along his shoulder. He cradled a tankard in one hand and waved it with grand exaggeration at the nearest cluster of marines and free blades. "To the cliff bastard who shot at me from that blasted tower," he declared, voice hoarse but triumphant. "If he's still alive, bring him here. I owe him my thanks for making me just angry enough to survive." A cheer rose. One pirate slapped another on the back, hard enough to knock him over, and a small crew broke into a clumsy tavern song. Caspian grinned and drank deeply. Beside him, lounging more gracefully, and with a flask of chilled Eldorian plum wine in hand, was Captain Elan Marwood. His mask was off, though he kept the silver filigree nestled on his lap, polished clean, despite the soot around him. His pale blue eyes watched the revelry with a quiet, enduring amusement. "You've become sentimental in your victories," he said. "Sentiment tastes like victory and burns like good rum," Caspian replied, then leaned over and nudged Marwood with his elbow. "Besides, we earned this." Marwood tilted his head. "And when the council demands accountings for the powder spent, the crews lost, the damage to the quay—" Caspian laughed. "I'll send them your wine bill. That'll shut them up." Before Marwood could reply, a deeper voice cut in. "You two drunkards celebrating like sea gods, and here I am trying to keep the whole fortress from sinking under our feet." They turned as Commander Doran Corval approached, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, the white and navy cloak of the Meridian Armada trailing behind him, its hem already singed in half a dozen places. Corval wasn't like the pirates. He wore his uniform even in victory, though he'd stripped off the medals for the occasion and now carried a half-drained flask of amber brandy. "We've secured the upper batteries and started the sweep," he continued without preamble. "Reavers are either dead or in chains. We've got a dozen locked in the oubliette, what passes for a prison under the eastern ward, and the engine—" He glanced toward the stone beneath their feet, as if feeling the pulse that still thrummed faintly through it. "The Eldorian arcanists are down in the old conduits now. It's running, and recently. But it wasn't awakened by druidic rites. Whatever lit it, it wasn't done the old way." He shook his head. "That thing was built by Meridia's druids, half stonework, half living spell. It shouldn't be running." He paused, then said more grimly, "But someone stirred it anyway, whatever turned it back on." "Can wait until tomorrow," Caspian cut in, lifting his tankard. "Tonight, you're not a commander. You're the man who took back his birthplace. Try and act like it." Corval blinked, surprised by the interruption, but then his expression softened. He looked out toward the burned eastern tower. "My great-grandmother was born beneath those cliffs," he said quietly, "before the Reavers turned it into a charnel house. I was just a child when my family fled, thrown aboard a refugee ship as the garrison burned behind us. I swore, if I ever had the chance, I'd see it reclaimed." Caspian clapped a hand to his shoulder. "Then reclaim it. Not just the stone, but the memory. One night without war maps won't kill you." Elan Marwood raised his cup in salute. "We all bleed in this war, Commander. But tonight at least we drink in a place that once denied us that right." Corval finally lifted his flask. "To Starwake reborn." Caspian echoed him with a grin. "To the fallen, and to the bastards who lived." Their toast was echoed down the lines. Free blades, marines, supply quartermasters, and former smugglers raising mugs and flasks alike. The rum tasted of ash and salt, and the food was barely warm, but it did not matter. They had cracked open a fortress thought impregnable, and for one night they were all kings of the coast. The future would come in its time, and with its council's demands and retaliations. But for now, the sea was quiet, and the walls of Starwake rang with songs once silenced. The music had grown louder, so had the drinking. By the third hour of the banquet, The central yard of Starwake's upper garrison had transformed into a riot of makeshift celebration. A string of old reaver drums, once used to signal alarm, now beat a thunderous rhythm as pirates danced with reckless joy, some with partners, others with bottles. Flags of fallen ships were strung from rampart to rampart, fluttering like the bones of slain beasts hung in trophy. Caspian stood atop a supply crate, shirt open, hair matted with sweat and wine, leading a chorus of half-sober guild hands through an obscene rendition of The Tide Lord's Daughter. He sang louder than the rest, stomping his boot against the wood, in time with the drums, tankards sloshing. Below him, Elan Marwood watched with arms crossed and a barely contained smile. He had long since withdrawn from the centre of the chaos, preferring a vantage just beneath a scorched archway. His wine cup remained half full, untouched for the last hour. "I've seen you charm diplomats with a sonnet," said a voice behind him, dry and amused. "Now you're surrounded by drunk pirates and broken furniture. Should I be worried?" Commander Dorinic Corval leaned against a half-toppled barrel, sleeves rolled up, a short dagger still sheathed at his hip, a habit he hadn't shaken even now. Marwood exhaled through his nose. "Charm and chaos are not so different, Commander. Both depend on timing. One just ends with more spilled wine. And less paperwork." Marwood's smile was thin. "Sometimes." Corval's gaze turned to the makeshift ramparts above. "I walked the east wall earlier. They left the old house marks etched into the stone. Family Crest's mine was there, a tower with 3 stars above a breaking wave." His voice was quieter now. "I touched it. Thought about the men who stood there back when we still held this place. Thought about what it meant for my mother to leave it behind." Marwood nodded. "You'll rebuild it." Corval gave a slow shake of his head. "No, not like it was. Not in the way she remembers. But that's not always a curse, is it?" Marwood tilted his head. "You sound more like a poet than a soldier." "I come from a line of salt poets," Corval replied, grinning. "We just traded ink for gunpowder when the reavers arrived." Across the yard, Caspian had now descended from his crate and was arm-wrestling 2 Marines at once, bellowing oaths in 3 languages and threatening to tie their spines in reef knots if they lost before he'd finished his ale. Cavell watched the display with amusement, but there was a trace of unease in his jaw. "He's dangerous," the commander said. Not as an insult, but as an observation, like one noting that fire was hot or the tide could kill. "Caspian," Marwood responded, still smiling faintly. "Yes, but not to you. Not tonight." "That's the thing," Marin said, eyes narrowing. "I'm not sure who he's dangerous to." At that moment, Caspian approached, arms slung around the shoulders of a young lieutenant, sweat pouring down his neck, eyes bright with fire and salt. He caught their gaze and tossed them both a nod. "We're drinking in a dead empire's mouth," he said, laughing. "Might as well sing to Calliope while the echoes still dance." "You'll catch her attention with that racket," Marwood muttered. Caspian raised his cup. "Then let her revel in it." But as he walked off, Corval, his eyes lingered, thoughtful. The music did not stop immediately. It hiccuped. A sudden awkward silence swallowed one note, then the next, until the sea shanty slurred into nothing and hung there, mid-breath, like a question unasked. A half-eaten roasted duck had just struck Caspian Vael square in the chest. The drumbeat faltered. Tankards froze, halfway to lips. Somewhere to the left, someone dropped a fork, and it clanged far too loud. Caspian looked down at the mess sliding down his coat. Then slowly, too slowly, raised his eyes. The broad, unshaven figure stood atop a bench, swaying slightly. "Kirin Malgrave," Caspian said aloud, not bothering to shout. "You drunk sod." "You bastard," Malgrave slurred, then steadied himself with a breath. His tone shifted, not mocking but scathing. "You brass-chained whore of Meridia." That did it. Gasps cut through the courtyard like blades. A dozen hands fell to weapons. Some stood, others backed away. Even the wind held still. Marwood tensed. Vael, standing not far behind, reached slowly for his blade. But Caspian stood quiet, not frozen, coiled. Malgrave laughed, but there was pain in it, raw and real. "You come here dripping in blood and victory and raise a toast to the Armada's glory. Are we dogs then? Warhounds for hire? Biting at our own kind just because the leash pulls hard enough?" "You're drunk," Caspian said, voice low. "I'm clearer than ever, you sea-painted ghost," Malgrave roared, stepping off the bench. "I've bled with you. Fought beside you at the Razor Reefs, remember that? But this—" He gestured broadly at the banners, the Armada flags, the lined-up captains in uniform. "This is not who we are." He looked around now, eyes pleading to the gathered crowd of guild sailors and freeblades. "My uncle sails with the Reavers. My cousin's second mate on the Vesper Queen, the Hollow Teeths, the San Maros, even the Nightshade Brats. They've all got kin on the other side of these cannons, and you'd have us kill them? For Meridian? For nobles who'd throw us in chains if we anchored one dock too far west?" Silence. Even the fire crackled too loudly. "We are the Free Sea," Malgrave continued, pacing now. "Not their navy. Not their whores. I've seen brothers put pistols to each other's heads because of this alliance, seen guild blood spilled on guild blades." He turned finally to Caspian. "And you. You who used to spit at Armada officers who took their medals and melted them into shot. You stand here in their colours, wearing your chains of brass like they were crowns." He pointed. "You've forgotten your way, Vael." That was the strike. Caspian took one step forward. His jaw clenched. His knuckles went white around the tankard still in his hand. "Say that again," he said. Malgrave didn't flinch. "You've forgotten your—" The tankard shattered. Caspian had thrown it full force, not at Malgrave's head, but at the ground between them where it burst like thunder. In the same motion, his hand was on his blade, and steel cleared the scabbard with a hissing whisper. Malgrave drew his own slowly, as if inviting the end. But the killing stroke never came. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The world shrank to 2 men and a breath between them. The gleam of 2 blades, the hiss of cooling steel where the tankard's ale still steamed on the stones. The torchlight flickered against their faces. Caspian, sharp with fury, jaw clenched like a vice. Kirin Malgrave, his expression caught between grief and defiance. Then chaos threatened to break. Commander Corvel's hand shot to his sword. "Enough!" he barked, stepping forward, every inch the Meridian officer once more. "He insults the Alliance! He dies where he stands!" Caspian's head snapped toward him, eyes wide, voice rising from somewhere far darker than the moment demanded. "He's mine!" The crowd stirred. Pirates shifted uneasily. A few of the younger freeblades reached for their own knives, not at Malgrave, but in reflex. Old habits, when tension filled the air. One of the Marines kicked over a stool, drawing startled laughter that died as quickly as it came. And through it all, Captain Elan Marwood moved. He crossed the space between them with the calm precision of a duelist, every gesture deliberate. His unmasked face, still too pale from smoke and wine, showed nothing but steady control. He placed himself between Caspian and Vael in one smooth motion, then turned slightly, his eyes flashing once toward the commander. The look was not a plea. It was an order, quiet and absolute. Vael froze, blade half drawn. "Stand down," Marwood said softly, voice carrying like silk through the crowd. "All of you." Caspian's sword was still raised. He trembled with the effort of holding it, not from fear, but from rage held just barely in check. Malgrave's expression faltered. Beneath the drink and bravado, regret began to surface. "You think this is loyalty," Malgrave spat, but the words had lost their edge. "You think the armadas will remember your names. You'll die for a crown that doesn't even know you exist." Marwood's voice cut clean through him. "And yet, you live under the sea they keep safe from your cousin's torches." The words were measured, elegant, but they carried an unmistakable warning. He stepped closer to Malgrave, lowering his tone. "Walk away, Kirin. Tonight is for the living, not the ghosts." For a long, taut moment it seemed the man might press his luck further. Then his shoulders sagged. He sheathed his cutlass and spat into the dirt, muttering something lost to the wind. Marwood nodded to two nearby sailors. "See him below. Find him water, a bunk, and something strong enough to make him forget how close he came to bleeding out in front of his friends." They obeyed. When Malgrave had been dragged from sight, the silence lingered, heavy, uncertain. The revellers looked to Caspian, waiting for his laugh, his usual mocking ease to return. But none came. Marwood turned to the crowd, lifting his cup with a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. "Well then," he said, as if nothing at all had happened, "the man's got poor aim and poorer manners. Let's not waste good rum on silence." A hesitant cheer went up, then another. The drums resumed, the voices followed, and the illusion of celebration limped forward again, but the warmth had gone out of the air. Caspian stood motionless for a moment longer, breathing hard. His sword hung loose at his side. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out through the broken archway toward the ramparts, into the night beyond the firelight. No one stopped him, not even Marwood. Outside, the wind had shifted. The sea murmured against the cliffs, whispering secrets too old for men to bear. Caspian stood once more at the edge of the sentinel post, the same broken turret where hours ago he had bled and fought and nearly died. Now he returned not with sword in hand, but with a bottle half empty, fingers slack around its neck. The wind pulled at his coat and hair, cold and salt rough, and the stars above blinked through low ribbons of mist. The party below had dimmed to a low murmur, the occasional burst of laughter, the dull thump of a drum, the soft rise of a chorus trying to remember the next line of a song no one truly knew. Below him, the sea breathed against the cliffs, its pulse steady, ancient, dispassionate. He sat. The stone still bore scorch marks where cannon fire had torn through the wall. The scent of black powder clung to the mortar like a ghost's perfume. He leaned back, shoulders pressing into cold rock, and took another slow swig from the bottle. The warmth in his chest dulled the ache in his shoulder, but not the weight behind his eyes. His thoughts drifted to Malgrave's words, heavy and coarse. Then the wind shifted again, from the east now, curling in from open sea, and memory, unbidden, sharp as flint, sharpened around him. In the haze of half-consciousness he saw a dark corner, a flickering lantern, the reek of brine and rum, the whispering laughter of dockside ghosts, and she, Miria Nightwind, with eyes the colour of storm glass, and a voice always a note too calm. Leaning near, breath tinged with cinnamon and wine, she murmured, "Beware the shadows behind shadows, Caspian. They move in silence, but they are always watching." He hadn't asked what she meant. Not then. Not after all the rum. He had laughed, brushed it off with a joke about reavers hiding in barrels. But now, in the dim haze of the turret's ruin, the words drifted back like drifting ash. Shadows behind shadows. He felt the bottle slip slightly from his grip, fingers numb. The waves thundered harder now, louder. The gull cried out below, startled by something unseen. He closed his eyes. The taste of victory still clung to his mouth. But beneath it, something bitter. Not defeat, not regret. Doubt, and that was far more dangerous.